How's it going, you guys, and welcome to Mornin Cup. We started off with the news that foreign ministers out of India, Japan, Australia, as well as the United States will be meeting for a quadrilateral meeting. Now, considering the ethics of this meeting is entirely based on, the Indo-Pacific region and the solidarity of the region, as well as the smooth sailing of operations in the region, this is just promising in terms of people understanding that the world coming together is the future of things, unlike, the propositions of China and the South China Sea. And what we understand from this quadrilateral meeting is the fact that that will not be the only thing that the four nations will be talking about. Also, what they'll be talking about is dealing with other global issues. Considering security in the Indo-Pacific region, amongst fears that China might want to breach more waters than just the South China Sea and start claiming parts of the ocean that are nowhere near its shores. With that being a possibility, these four quadrilateral nations are also discussing global climate change as well as the ongoing battle against the coronavirus pandemic. What we understand from this quadrilateral engagement is the fact that humanity is still prosperous amongst numerous aspects of things, no matter what the conclusion of things might turn out to be. We move on to the fact that Chinese IT technicians as well as Chinese oppression hardware, if you will, has landed in Myanmar upon request from the coup leaders. Now, this technology and this hardware is essentially used to track down people, essentially used to facial recognize people, and this is going to be used to crack down on protesters as well as organizers of said protests. Amongst rising concerns of how this coup is quickly turning into an all-out military dictatorship with no figurehead in place so that the coup can never be toppled over by the execution of one particular leader. What we understand is the fact that China is now officially indulging in giving rise to a dictatorship. As China always has, the censorship of democracy and the censorship of the regular Joe is turning out to be China's new occupation. Not just inside its own borders, but now officially abroad as well, sparking global outcry and condemnation against China and its activities. People all over the world have protested against China and its commitment to the Myanmarese coup. Even though the United Nations has overturned its objection to Myanmarese military officials being handed an ultimatum dictating the fact that the coup can no longer proceed, China as well as Russia are the only two nations that have refused to sign on to this international claim, dictating the fact that the United Nations by no means can step in as long as two prominent members of the Security Council don't hop on board, further inciting the fact that the world is quickly turning divided. One side that stands with true democracy and the voices of the people, and the other stands with true communism and the voices of the government and what the so-called government officials dictate, and thereby inciting the fact that countries that have one figurehead in place that makes all the calls, like Xi Jinping from China and Vladimir Putin from Russia, we understand the fact today that democracy is not going to be able to sustain itself in Myanmar as long as Chinese influence as well as Russian influence does not step out of the picture. Also, what we understand is the fact that the Tibetan liberation movement has picked up steam since the last Tibetan festival came into play. And since then, we've seen a global outcry for the liberation of Tibet, if you will. We also understand the fact that the Dalai Lama, the official leader of Tibet, has now been living in exile for numerous years in India. What that just goes to show is that Tibet wants to be liberated. Tibet wants to be free. But upon the people of Tibet asking to have their own nation to themselves, we saw that there was massive bloodshed by the Chinese authorities. And the same case is what's being incited towards Taiwan and Hong Kong. We understand that Xinjiang, the place where concentration camps of the Uyghurs has been so infamously portrayed, China has blocked any and all media attempts to, portray such coverage inside its own borders at least. It can by no means suppress media coverage across the globe, but it's trying nevertheless. The BBC, the British Broadcasting Channel, has been blocked in China for covering topics that harm the image of China, according to them. Well, atrocities against human beings, no matter what you believe your image is to be, is not the way to go forward. Humanity as a whole cannot be going ahead in our own terms, with our species looking ahead in terms of the gains that can be made as a whole, if people in the world are still being suppressed and thrown into concentration camps because they don't share the same beliefs as you. We never know what the future of the Chinese Communist Party might be, but the actions and the roles that the Chinese Communist Party is making across the globe, especially with this Myanmarese coup involvement, is raising more questions than answers. We move on to the final story of the day with Texas. Now, Texas is one of the biggest states in the United States, and in the past few weeks, Texas has faced massive power cuts. Power cuts the likes of which have not been seen in decades in the state. Well, upon a massive snowstorm that hit Texas, we understand the fact that hundreds and thousands of people are now without power as well as without water, as the water treatment plants are now unable to function properly because of a loss of power. Further inciting preppers as well as right-wing media moguls to dictate the fact that they saw this coming in the entire time. They saw the whole globalist cabal ensuing a long time ago. And you, as someone who was consuming right-wing media, should be very aware of the fact that these people have been citing this for a long time. Being prepared is by no means wrong. Being prepared is by no means just substantial or assigned as, well, a freak. But what we do understand today is that the only people in Texas that are, well, currently sustaining an independent lifestyle without having their entire life turned upside down because of loss of power and loss of water are preppers, are people that, well, consumed the right amount of products. People that prepped, people that, well, ordered food that lasted, ready to eat meals, food that they could store, water that they could harvest on their own accord of their own lands. Considering Texas is one of the most free states in the United States, and it has a lot of liberties assigned to the people of Texas, certain liberties that might not necessarily be available anywhere else in the United States, we understand today that those of us that are living in the free world are also responsible for our own assets, are also responsible for our own resources. Being entirely dependent on the food chain or on the supply chain that might currently be flawlessly executing itself is just a matter of time before it all comes crashing down. We saw in the very starting of this pandemic how food chains completely stopped, how supply chains completely stopped, how resources ran thin. And that just reminded us of a time, what if it stopped for good? What then? How would you, as a person who has to take care of his entire family, as a person who has to sustain themselves, survive? With that being said, we understand that there is a lot changing in the world. We understand that there is a lot that the world has to offer to us as a whole. The news cycle is ever evolving. And until and unless we stay on top of things, there's only so much you can do to keep on track with what the world is currently enduring. Until then, this has been your Morning Cup. I'll see you tomorrow.